She wasn't walking to a wedding, she was being sold. In a church full of gangsters, Elena crosses march to the altar like collateral for her father's debt, while Mafia King Victor Drazi waits to claim her like property. But just before the vows lock her into hell, the doors blow open and a stranger walks in like death itself. He doesn't ask for permission, he gives her one choice: stay and be owned, or run and start a war. And the insane part? She takes his hand.
For some, the matrimonial procession is a path toward romantic union. For the subject, Elena Cross, it was the liquidation of a debt settled with her own person. Her anatomy functioned as currency. Her autonomy, the collateral. The figure awaiting her, Victor Drazzi, did not desire a spouse. He sought complete possession. Within the cold October confines of the Chicago sanctuary, among individuals whose histories were deeply compromised, Elena apprehended a clinical truth that induced physiological shock. This was not a wedding ceremony. It was a contractual transfer of assets. Yet when an explosive entry shattered the church's sanctity and an unknown party offered an alternative, she initiated an action with a binary outcome: termination or liberation. To observe the full trajectory of this case study, indicate approval and note your city of observation. We will chart the consequences of Elena's decision. The October wind in Chicago presented as a sharp, incisive force, a sensation Elena Cross registered acutely through the delicate lace of her ceremonial attire. The choice of white, symbolic of purity, was a grotesque irony given her status as bartered goods. She observed her reflection in the bride's antechamber of St. Augustine's, a mirror that had witnessed innumerable genuine celebrations. She did not belong to that cohort. The garment's fit was precise, a detail overseen by her father. He had managed every variable except for the provision of her own agency. "You look beautiful, mija." Elena's mandible tensed at the sound of her father's voice. Carlos Cross occupied the doorway, his expensive suit failing to conceal his discomposure, a characteristic that had defined him since the onset of his gambling pathology, the accumulation of debt, and the arrival of Victor Drazzi to collect. "Do not use that name," Elena stated with controlled volume. "You forfeited that privilege when you designated me as collateral." Carlos exhibited a brief somatic recoil but remained. "It is not what you think. It is precisely that." She pivoted to confront him, and the intensity in her expression compelled him to retreat a step. "You wagered our entire existence, the residence, my mother's heirlooms, your own integrity. When those assets were depleted, you pledged me." "Victor is a respectable man. Victor is a racketeer." The term permeated the space between them, stark and dissonant. "He traffics in weapons, narcotics, and extortion. One half of this city fears him, the other is on his payroll. And you are presenting me as a diplomatic offering." Carlos's face flushed. "You lack understanding of these dynamics." "My understanding is absolute." Elena's vocal tone was now devoid of affect, a dissociative state adopted for survival. "I understand you're a coward. I understand you would sacrifice your own offspring to evade the repercussions of your folly. And I understand that subsequent to this day, I no longer have a father." The words landed with the force of a physical assault. For an instant, she anticipated an emotional breakdown from him. A part of her, a diminishing vestige of hope, wished for it. She wanted contrition, an apology, a promise of an alternative solution. But Carlos Cross lacked the psychological fortitude for such a display. "The ceremony commences in 15 minutes, he said finally, his voice an empty vessel. "Do not be tardy." He departed without further comment. Elena returned her focus to the mirror. The reflection was that of an unknown individual. Her hair was styled in a manner she would never elect. Cosmetics had been applied by a professional retained by Victor's organization. The dress represented a value exceeding 6 months of her salary from the photography studio she had been compelled to leave. Victor had mandated her resignation. The wives of powerful men, he had decreed, do not require employment. They require only compliance. Her mobile device vibrated. It was an impulse she should have suppressed, a form of self-inflicted psychological distress. But her motor functions preceded conscious thought. The communication was from Sarah, her closest associate, the only one who had challenged the logic of this arrangement. It is not too late. I have a vehicle. I have funds. Give the signal and I am there. Elena's fingers paused above the screen. The action was simple. 3 characters typed in sequence, YES. Sarah would arrive. They would flee. Their escape was a low probability outcome. Victor Drazzi did not relinquish assets. Men of his profile possessed long-term memory and extensive operational reach. If Elena absconded, the consequences would extend beyond her. Sarah would be targeted. Carlos would be targeted. All accomplices would be targeted. She deleted the message without a reply. The door opened once more. The new arrival was Victor's sister Celeste, a woman who utilized expensive attire as a form of armor and whose smile mimicked that of a predator. "It is time," Celeste announced, her gaze appraising Elena as if she were inventory. "Victor is waiting." How fortunate for Victor. Celeste's smile remained fixed, but her eyes lost all warmth. "Allow me to offer some counsel, Elena. The quicker you assimilate to your new circumstances, the less difficult your existence will be. Victor demonstrates generosity to those who provide gratification and can be exceptionally punitive to those who do not." "Is that your rationalization?" Elena maintained direct eye contact. "To reconcile with his methods that produced the look in your eyes?" For a brief moment, Celeste's facade fractured. An expression of raw, unhealed trauma surfaced, then was immediately suppressed beneath layers of practiced detachment. "You will learn," Celeste stated softly. "By one method or another, you will learn." She exited, leaving Elena in solitude. The church bells began their toll. The allotted time had expired. Elena traversed the corridor, her limbs feeling disconnected from her nervous system. At the corridor's end, Carlos was positioned to escort her, to transfer her ownership. The vernacular was grotesquely accurate. "Elena," he began, "do not." She took his arm as a procedural necessity but avoided his gaze. "Just do not." The sanctuary doors swung open. St. Augustine's was at capacity, filled with rows of unknown individuals in expensive suits with affectless eyes. This was Victor's ecosystem, his associates, his kin, his criminal enterprise. Among them, likely observing with satisfaction, were her father's creditors who had accepted this arrangement as payment. At the altar, Victor Drazzi was waiting. His attractiveness was predatory, defined by sharp angles and suppressed power. 42 years of age, possessing immense wealth and connections to every illicit operation in Chicago. His tuxedo fit him like an outer layer of skin, impeccably tailored. When his smile was directed at her, it did not engage his eyes. His eyes were the most disturbing feature, dark, analytical, and utterly absent of warmth. They assessed her as one would a newly acquired vehicle, appreciating its external features, while already calculating its utility. Elena compelled herself to advance. Left foot, right foot, suppress cognition, suppress emotion, simply endure. The music, a conventional wedding march, sounded to her like a funeral dirge. Midway down the aisle, she erred by looking at Victor again. He winked. The gesture, so casual, so confident in his acquisition, caused a psychological fracture within her. The situation was real. It was unfolding. In moments, she would be legally bound to this man who would possess her in every meaningful way, with no recourse available. She was 3 rows from the altar when the church doors were breached. There was no literal explosion, but the impact of the heavy wood against stone created an equivalent acoustic and psychological shock. Every head turned. A man stood silhouetted in the doorway against the gray October light. Tall, broad, and clad in a black suit seemingly designed for conflict. He did not rush or shout, but proceeded down the aisle with a calm, methodical purpose that arrested Elena's breathing. The environment devolved into chaos. Victor's security personnel drew weapons from various points of concealment. The guests vocalized distress and sought cover. The officiant retreated from the altar, hands raised in a gesture of non-aggression. The stranger, however, did not alter his trajectory. "Adrian," Victor's voice cut through the commotion with knife-like precision. "You possess significant audacity to appear here." This confirmed a prior association, a complicating factor. The stranger, Adrian, halted directly adjacent to Elena and Carlos. In close proximity, his features were clearly visible. Mid-30s, perhaps. His hard-lined face suggested exposure to extreme trauma. A scar bisected his left eyebrow, stark against his skin. His eyes were nearly black, and when they focused on Elena, she registered the contact as a physical sensation. "Elena Cross," he said. His voice was low, gravelly, and more menacing than a shout would have been. "You are presented with a choice." "She is not going anywhere," Victor snarled. "She belongs to me, paid for, a closed transaction." "Human beings cannot be owned." Adrian's gaze remained locked on Elena's. "Irrespective of the agreements made or debts leveraged, you are not an asset. You are an individual, and you have a choice." Elena's heart rate escalated dramatically. Around them, Victor's men had established a cordon, weapons aimed, awaiting the command to use lethal force. This stranger was poised to be executed for disrupting the event, and he was offering her agency. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Someone who is exiting this building," Adrian stated, extending his hand toward her. "The variable is whether you will accompany me." "This is irrational," Carlos hissed. "Elena, remain where you are." "Your input is no longer relevant," Adrian said, his gaze shifting to Carlos with undisguised contempt before returning to Elena. "This is her decision. If you leave with him," Victor said, his voice dangerously low, "I will hunt you both. I will force you to witness the destruction of everyone you value, and then I will make you plead to be returned to me." Elena found his threat credible. Victor Drazzi was not prone to empty pronouncements. But standing there, caught between her purchaser and a stranger offering liberation, Elena arrived at a fundamental realization. In either scenario, her life as she knew it was over. To marry Victor was to accept the eradication of her identity, a methodical suffocation of every aspiration and facet of her being under his possessive weight. To flee with Adrian presented high probability of clinical death, a cranial gunshot wound, a paramortem stabbing. Of the 2 terminal outcomes, at least one ensured she would expire as herself. Elena engaged Adrian's hand. His grip was warm, a solid anchor, and the synaptic signal from her fingers closing on his altered the paradigm. Victor vocalized a primal noise, a command, or a malediction. The distinction was lost as the sanctuary devolved into chaos, but Adrian was already in motion. He pulled Elena into his proximity, his body serving as a ballistic shield, and initiated egress. Not toward the main doors. That exit was saturated with hostile agents. Instead, he moved toward the side altar, where a small door led to the clergyman's private quarters. The sharp reports of firearms echoed. Elena registered the sounds of splintering wood and shattering stained glass. A scream manifested. It was impossible to identify its source as a guest or one of Victor's operatives. Adrian forced the side door open with a kick and propelled her through it. They entered a narrow, dimly lit corridor, the air thick with the scent of olibanum and aja timber. Another door at the far end promised access to the street. "Wait," Elena vocalized to Snick. The bridal gown was a tactical liability, its lace and tulle impeding movement. The mandated heels made effective locomotion impossible. "I can't." Without verbalizing, Adrian stooped and severed the lower portion of her gown with a single forceful tear. In the confined space, the sound of rending fabric was acoustically startling. Elena remained stationary, observing him with disbelief, now clad in a ragged knee-length version of the dress. "Improved," he stated, before reacquiring her hand and resuming their flight. They emerged onto a side street where a black sport utility vehicle idled at the curb. Adrian opened the rear door and physically deposited Elena inside, following immediately after her. "Proceed!" he commanded. The driver, a lean subject with silver strands in his dark hair, required no further stimulus. The vehicle accelerated from the curb, just as Victor's men egressed from the church with weapons drawn. Elena heard additional gunfire and felt the vehicle execute an evasive maneuver, but they were now moving at high velocity, navigating Chicago traffic with a proficiency that indicated prior experience in such scenarios. She was compressed against Adrian in the rear seat, his arm across her shoulders, his body still postured to intercept any projectiles that might breach the windows. Her cardiac rhythm was tachycardic, a frantic pulse against her rib cage. Her hands exhibited severe tremors, forcing her to clench them into fists. "What?" Her voice fractured. She attempted again. "What was that event?" "You were married," Adrian stated. A trace of dark humor may have inflected his tone. "Then you were unmarried. Congratulations." Elena began to laugh. The reaction was pathological, a clear manifestation of shock as the situation contained no humorous elements, yet she was unable to arrest the response. Great hysterical vocalizations that bordered on sobbing. Adrian made no attempt to pacify her. He simply maintained his supportive posture and allowed the emotional catharsis to run its course. When the laughter finally abated, leaving a hollow, tremulous state, Elena fixated on him. "A true assessment." "Why?" she inquired. "What was your motive?" Adrian's facial expression was unreadable. "Because Victor Drazzi is a psychopath, and no subject deserves to be delivered to a predator." "You have no knowledge of me." "I have sufficient data." The statement was both cryptic and deeply unsettling. Before Elena could probe further, the driver interjected. "We have acquired a tail, 2 vehicles maintaining proximity." Elena rotated to observe through the rear window. Indeed, 2 black sedans were maneuvering through traffic behind them, reducing the distance. "Time to the safe house?" Adrian inquired. 20 minutes, perhaps 15 with tactical routing." "Employ them." The sport utility vehicle accelerated, pressing Elena back into her seat. They traversed the Chicago streetscape, ignoring traffic signals and utilizing alleyways. the driver navigating with a precision that implied a comprehensive mental map of every urban escape route. Victor's vehicles maintained pursuit. Marcus, Adrian addressed the driver, his tone calm despite the kinetic environment. Upon reaching Lakeshore Drive, you are to terminate their surveillance completely. No trace. Elena's fingers impressed into the leather upholstery. What is your affiliation? We are the agents preventing your death today, Marcus replied from the front seat. For further information, consult the principal. My function is transport. They entered Lakeshore Drive at 70 miles per hour. The Chicago skyline became a kinetic blur of glass, steel, and overcast sky. Marcus navigated between vehicles with minimal clearance, prompting Elena to close her eyes, anticipating a collision. When she reopened them, the pursuing vehicles had vanished. Threat neutralized at the merge, Marcus reported. We are clear. Adrian's arm finally relaxed its tense posture around Elena's shoulders. Good. Maintain elevated awareness regardless. Victor's persistency is a known variable. Victor will terminate me, Elena stated, the initial shock now receding, replaced by a cold, systemic terror. He will terminate all of us. He will attempt to, Adrian conceded, but first he must locate us. This is Chicago. He controls 50% of the city, and I control the other 50%. Adrian's eyes met hers, and within them she perceived a quality almost more terrifying than Victor's vacant affect. Certitude. Absolute, immovable certitude. Victor Drazi is a significant power, but he is not invulnerable. And to access you, he must first neutralize me. Why? Elena repeated, her tone now desperate. Why is this your concern? What is my significance to you? Adrian averted his gaze, looking out the window at the lake, a vast expanse of cold gray water. You are an individual who merits better than being a bartered commodity, he said at last. It was not a direct answer, but it was the only data she would receive for now. They proceeded north, leaving the urban core behind. The residences became larger, more isolated. Flora replaced architecture. Eventually, Marcus navigated onto a private access road that snaked through dense woods, terminating at a gate suitable for a military complex. Marcus input a security code. The gate retracted. Beyond it, Elena observed the primary structure. It occupied a hillside with a view of the lake, a construction of stone and glass with sharp, modern lines. It was simultaneously beautiful and sterile, fortified by high walls, surveillance cameras, and men in dark suits who observed their approach with professional vigilance. Welcome home, Adrian said, and the inflection he used caused a pilomotor reflex on Elena's skin. This was not a home. It was a fortress. She had merely exchanged one containment facility for another. Marcus halted at the main entrance. Before Elena could react, Adrian had exited the vehicle and was opening her door, extending his hand once more. She paused. That hand had extracted her from the church, from Victor, and into this new state of uncertainty. Yet what alternative was available to her? She accepted it, allowing him to assist her exit. The October wind was more potent here, its thermal properties, influenced by the lake, penetrating her damaged dress. She was hypothermic, terrified, and so far outside her operational depth as to have lost all bearings. Adrian removed his suit jacket and placed it over her shoulders. It retained his body heat and smelled of high-end cologne and cordite. Come, he said. Let us move you inside. The mansion's interior was as formidable as its exterior, featuring polished floors, modern art, and decor. suitable for a design publication. Elena, however, barely processed these details. Her focus was on the occupants. 4 individuals were present in the main chamber, 3 males and 1 female, all in dark, functional attire, all observing Elena with expression that ranged from clinical curiosity to suspicion. "This is the subject?" the woman inquired. She appeared to be in her 30s, Elena estimated, with black hair in a severe chignon and eyes that conveyed a sharp, analytical quality. Her presentation is unremarkable. Her presentation is that of an individual who has just escaped Victor Drazi, Adrian countered, his voice containing a clear warning. This indicates she is either extremely courageous or extremely foolish. In either case, she is now under my protection. Disseminate this directive. Any agent who makes unauthorized contact with her will answer to me. The ambient temperature in the room seemed to decrease by approximately 10 degrees. Elena realized with a jolt that these individuals feared Adrian. Not mere respect, but genuine fear. Into what situation had she been inserted? Adrian continued, nodding to the woman. Escort Elena to the guest suite. Procure for her any necessary items, clothing, sustenance, anything, and post a guard at her door. For containment or for security? Ree asked. Both. A knot of anxiety formed in Elena's stomach. I am a prisoner. You are protected, Adrian corrected. There is a distinction. Is there? Elena drew his jacket more tightly around herself, because from my current vantage point, the 2 states feel remarkably similar. For the first time, an expression that could be interpreted as respect appeared in Adrian's eyes. A fair assessment. Allow me to be explicit, then. You are not confined. You may leave at your discretion. You could exit through that door right now if you so choose. Elena glanced at the door, then back at him. And Victor's operatives will neutralize you before you reach the main road. Therefore, my freedom to leave is illusory. You are free to make any choice you wish, Adrian said, but choices have consequences. If you remain, you are safe. If you leave, you die. That is not my control over you. That is objective reality. It was, Elena had to concede, a brutally honest assessment, which somehow exacerbated the condition. For how long? She asked. The duration? What? How long must I remain here? Until Victor abandons his objective, until he erases me from his memory? Adrian's expression was grim. Victor does not abandon objectives, and he does not forget. Therefore, the answer is, the duration is unknown. Elena felt her remaining adrenaline reserves deplete, leaving her empty and exhausted. Her lower limbs began to tremble, and she had to hyperextend her knees to maintain a standing posture. Ree stepped forward, her expression softening marginally. Come, she said, her voice gentler now. The subject requires stabilization. We will provide nourishment and cleansing. Elena's impulse was to resist, to demand intel, to process the abrupt deconstruction of her reality. But Reese's assessment was accurate. She was exhibiting signs of physical collapse. Her equilibrium was failing, her peripheral vision narrowing. Acknowledged, she conceded. Reese escorted her through the estate, ascending a grand staircase and proceeding down a corridor of sealed entryways. The assigned quarters exceeded the entire square footage of Elena's previous residence. A bedroom, a lavatory, a sitting area, all rendered in a neutral palette likely intended for tranquilizing effect, but which felt only clinical. The sanitation facility is located there, Reese indicated. An attendant will bring apparel in your measurements. Sustenance is scheduled for 1900 hours if you wish to join us, or a tray can be delivered. I will dine here, Elena stated. The prospect of feigning normalcy at a table with Adrian and his associates was psychologically untenable. Reese acquiesced. Understood. And Elena, for the record, your actions were optimal. Victor would have annihilated you. As a contrast to this, Elena's gesture encompassed her gilded cage. Yes, Reese affirmed without inflection. As a contrast to this, she departed, and Elena registered the soft latching of the door, followed moments later by the sound of feet assuming a stationary post outside. A sentry for her protection, for her observation. Elena moved to the window to observe the lake. It was a vast, gray and cold expanse, its surface agitated by the wind. An entity both autonomous and confined. The water possessed limitless direction, but could not alter its fundamental state. She identified with the paradox. Her communication device vibrated from the purse Celeste had provided. Had that been only this morning, the temporal distortion was significant. Sarah, what is your location? Your father reports you absconded with an unknown male, and Victor is in a state of extreme agitation. Confirm your well-being. Elena analyzed the text. How could this scenario be articulated? I am secure, she finally transmitted. Communication is not possible at this time. I will clarify when feasible. Do not be concerned. It was a falsehood. Sarah's anxiety was a certainty. Yet what alternative report could Elena file? As she was securing the device, a new message arrived from an unlisted number. You have committed an error, Elena, but my capacity for forgiveness is great. Return within 24 hours, and this incident will be expunged. Thereafter, the amnesty is revoked. Victor. Elena's hand resumed its tremors. She reviewed the message 3 times, her cognitive functions racing. Was it plausible? Would he truly dismiss the transgression if she returned? Negative. Victor Drazi did not forgive. This was a baited trap, a maneuver to compel her voluntary return to his sphere of influence. Once recaptured, she erased the communication and blocked the originating number. Then, because her motor control was still compromised and her thoughts were spiraling, she required an action to avert a psychological break. Elena entered the lavatory and activated the shower. The water temperature was extreme, approaching a pain threshold, but she remained under the spray until her epidermis reddened and the last olfactory traces of the church were purged, until she could respire without the phantom sensation of Victor's gaze. Upon emerging, wrapped in a towel of a quality beyond her experience, she found evidence of an intrusion. A collection of garments was on the bed. Denim trousers, sweaters, underclothing in its original packaging, all correctly sized. How was her size known? This query spawned more disturbing ones. What was the extent of Adrian's intelligence on her? What was the duration of his operational planning? And critically, what was his motive? Elena dressed in the jeans and a soft gray sweater, both of which fit with precision. Her bridal gown was a ruined heap on the floor. She lifted it, noted the mass of the destroyed textiles, and felt a brutal sense of gratification at its condition. The dress was a costume for a life performance she had rejected. She discarded it in the waste receptacle. A rap on the door triggered a startled response. Yes, your dinner, a male voice announced. Elena opened the door to a young man with a tray. He appeared no older than 25, with sandy hair and an affable expression that was incongruous with the severe environment. My name is Ethan, he said, smiling. I function as the household coordinator. Should you require anything, I am your point of contact. A temporal displacement device, Elena proposed. Ethan's smile broadened. We are out of stock. However, I can offer pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, and pie. Despite the circumstances, Elena's stomach contracted. She had not consumed nutrients since her morning coffee, having been too agitated for solid food. Thank you, she said, accepting the tray. Ethan nodded and began to withdraw, then hesitated. Listen, I recognize the extreme abnormality of this situation, but Adrian is a moral actor. It may not seem so now, but you are secure here. More secure than you have been for a significant time. On what do you base that assessment? Elena inquired. Because I have direct knowledge of what Victor Drazi does to his acquisitions. Ethan's demeanor darkened. And believe me, you do not want to acquire that knowledge firsthand. He departed before Elena could press for clarification. She consumed the meal in isolation, the food lacking savor despite its expert preparation. Through the window, the sun descended below the lake's horizon, coloring the water with fiery shades of orange and red. In the world beyond, Victor was plotting retribution. Within this house, Adrian was plotting. What? What was his objective regarding her? And deep within her own psyche, Elena detected the nascent stirrings of a state she had not experienced in months. Not fear, not acquiescence, but rage. She had been bartered, traded, abducted, and confined. Her life's trajectory had been dictated by men who perceived her as chattel, as a bargaining chip, as anything but an individual with volition. That was ending. Elena Cross had no data on the immediate future. She could not predict her survival for the next week, month, or year. She could not determine if Adrian was her rescuer or merely a different warden in a more opulent facility. But she knew one thing with absolute conviction. She was no longer anyone's asset. Whatever transpired next, she would confront it upright. And if Victor Drazi, or Adrian Vale, or any other entity believed she was controllable, they were about to receive a severe corrective lesson. The commodity they had attempted to trade possessed defenses, and she intended to use them. Beyond her window, night enveloped the lake, and Elena Cross commenced strategic planning for her own survival. Elena was roused by the sound of a dispute below her window. Sleep had been minimal. Each structural creak, each footstep in the hall, had triggered an adrenal response, a certainty that Victor's agents had breached the perimeter. Yet dawn had arrived, gray and cold, and she remained alive. A minor tactical victory. She rose and approached the window. On the lawn near the lake's edge, she could see Adrian and Marcus. Their dialogue was inaudible, but their kinesics were clear. Marcus was gesticulating, his facial muscles taut with agitation. Adrian remained perfectly stationary, observing, his own expression indecipherable. Then, Adrian vocalized something that silenced Marcus. A moment later, Marcus nodded and walked off, his posture rigid from the argument he had just lost. Adrian lingered by the water, gazing at the lake like a subject seeking answers from the waves. Elena retreated from the window before he could pivot and observe her surveillance. Her list of complications did not need the addition of voyeurism. Her phone rested on the nightstand. 3 new messages from blocked numbers indicated Victor had adapted his methods. "TikTok, Elena, the window is closing. Your father is imploring me for your safe return. Shall I inform him you selected a stranger over your kin? This is disappointing. I assessed you as more intelligent." Elena delete them all without response. To engage would be to provide positive reinforcement, to signal that his psychological warfare was effective, which it was. A knock at the door made her flinch. Yes, it's Ree. Adrian requires your presence. Breakfast in 20 minutes. Not an invitation, Elena registered. A summons. I am descending, she called. She showered, dressed in another set of new clothes, and attempted to arrange her hair in a way that didn't broadcast a state of psychological duress. She was unsuccessful. Her reflection displayed orbital shadowing, pallid skin, and a firmly set mouth reminiscent of her mother's during periods of anger. Her mother, deceased 3 years, spared the knowledge that her spouse would one day use their daughter as collateral. Perhaps that was a form of mercy. Elena navigated to the lower level by following the aroma of coffee. The kitchen was an industrial expanse of stainless steel and marble, a cold contradiction to the warmth a food preparation area should emit. 6 individuals occupied a long table, Adrian at its head, Marcus to his right, Reese to his left, and 3 others unknown to Elena. All heads turned upon her entry. Elena, Adrian stated, his tone neutral. Sit. An unoccupied chair was positioned at the table's far end, the maximum possible distance from Adrian. Elena took it, acutely conscious of 6 pairs of eyes monitoring her movements. Ethan materialized with a plate of eggs, bacon, and toast, placing it before her with the same amicable expression from the previous night. Coffee, please, Elena requested, finding his normalcy a relief in this assembly of threat actors. Everyone, Adrian resumed once Ethan had served her coffee and withdrawn. This is Elena Cross. For those not present yesterday, she is under my protection until further notice. Elena, you have met Ree and Marcus. The subject's handlers were identified as Nikolai, James, and Sophia. Nikolai presented as physically formidable, with a prominent scar indicating past violence. James affected an academic demeanor, yet his ocular movements betrayed a constant threat assessment. Sophia, a contemporary of Elena, possessed a disarming appearance. The group's initial reception was notably hostile. Nikolai, with a distinct Russian accent, questioned the mission's objective: to provide protective custody until Victor's fixation waned. Elena corrected him, demonstrating insight into Victor's pathology by stating he pursues retribution, not loses interest. Nikolai noted her verbal engagement, to which she retorted, affirming her presence and cognitive awareness. Elena verbalized their assessment of her as a liability, an evaluation she conceded. She then articulated her status as an unwilling participant in a conflict between alpha males. The statement elicited an unexpected laugh from Sophia, who expressed admiration for the subject's resilience. Marcus countered that fortitude is not a defense against ballistics. Adrian conceded the point, but framed it as a necessary baseline. He then addressed Elena directly, establishing strict protocols for her containment: no unauthorized departure from the premises, no contact with prior associations, and a total cessation of all electronic communication. These measures were designed to prevent location disclosure. Elena's somatic response, a tightened grip, indicated her perception of the situation as imprisonment. Ree reframed it as survival, reporting Victor had initiated a search. Chicago's criminal networks were either actively seeking her or waiting his bounty. Elena inquired about the monetary value placed on her. James quietly supplied the figure, $200,000, supplemented by favors, which he noted hold a higher value than currency. This sum stood in stark contrast to her previous socioeconomic status as a photographer's assistant earning $35,000 annually, a life defined by financial precarity and perceived familial failure. Elena expressed shock at the valuation. Adrienne contextualized Victor's actions as a public display of dominance, a response to the perceived theft of his property. The subject's role, he clarified, was secondary to the assertion of power. Elena found this analysis incongruous with her subjective experience. Adrienne elaborated that for a megalomaniac like Victor, ego and enterprise are inseparable. An affront to one constitutes an attack on both. He identified her public abandonment of him as the ultimate narcissistic injury. Elena voiced satisfaction at his humiliation, her tone containing notable venom. Marcus warned that her response showed a failure to grasp the resultant danger. A subject like Victor, when publicly shamed, will not cease aggression until he has extracted blood. Elena's retort was emotionally driven, suggesting her death at the church would have been a preferable, more contained outcome. Adrienne corrected her, stating their involvement predated the wedding. Elena's query for clarification was deferred. Adrienne redirected the group to immediate security concerns. Marcus reported surveillance footage showing 2 vehicles performing reconnaissance patterns near the perimeter, indicating a probe of their defenses. Adrienne ordered patrols doubled, with comprehensive surveillance covering all potential ingress points. Re-inquired about intelligence from city contacts. James reported that Victor was moving covertly through established channels, careful to avoid direct attribution. However, intelligence indicated extreme narcissistic rage. He was leveraging assets from New York, Detroit, and Miami, escalating the conflict beyond a local matter. This information induced a significant physiological stress response in Elena as the scope of Victor's resources and obsessive pursuit became psychologically concrete. The subject proposed fleeing the country as a solution. Adrienne dismissed this, citing Victor's international network across 15 nations and stating that any unsupported escape attempt would result in her death within 48 hours. Elena questioned her long-term prognosis, asking if she was to remain in indefinite seclusion. The objective, Adrienne clarified, was to neutralize the threat. Elena's derisive laugh indicated she correctly interpreted this euphemism as a plan to kill him. Adrienne acknowledged this as a potential outcome but mentioned other options, citing vulnerabilities in Victor's organization that could be leveraged. Elena identified this strategy as blackmail. Adrienne redefined it as survival. His hardened expression underscored the stakes, challenging her perception of Victor's intentions. He prompted her to confront the reality of Victor's pathology, that he would inflict prolonged suffering before killing her. Acknowledging this truth, Elena ceased her opposition. Her capitulation stemmed from the realization that her own choices, from her father's deaths to her escape attempt, had constructed her current confinement. She agreed to cooperate. When asked what was required, Adrienne presented a small data drive. He prompted her to recall a corporate photography assignment at the Meridian Hotel 3 weeks prior. Elena's memory was vague. She recalled it as a standard networking event for businessmen. Adrienne then revealed the critical detail. 2 attendees were Senator Mitchell Carson and Victor Drazi, whom she had photographed in proximity. Elena initially dismissed the significance of powerful men associating. James intervened, providing the context that the senator was ostensibly leading an investigation into arms trafficking. The man he was photographed with, James continued, operates one of the largest illicit weapons networks in the Midwest. Elena's physiological response indicated dawning comprehension. Adrienne confirmed their certainty, tapping the thumb drive which contained her complete photo set from the event. One image, through digital enhancement, revealed a partially legible shipping manifest on a nearby table, detailing a large weapons transfer to buyers of interest to federal authorities. He clarified they did not need her testimony regarding the photo itself. They required her to provide contextual intelligence, positions of individuals, overheard conversations, any details to reconstruct the event. Elena perceived the drive as a high-risk object. Re-interjected that Victor's homicidal intent was already established. This new strategy merely provided leverage for his incarceration rather than a purely defensive posture. Adrian added that failure was preferable to inaction. The subject's pre-existing anger toward Victor, stemming from his objectification of her, appeared to motivate her decision. Victor's intent to possess and control her had triggered deep-seated opposition. Elena agreed to help, but made a counter-demand for information. Adrienne noted her shift to a transactional mindset. She held his gaze, demanding to know the motivation behind his intervention at her wedding and his ongoing protection. A palpable tension filled the room, suggesting her question was taboo. Adrienne broke the silence by standing and commanding her to accompany him. He led her to an exterior terrace. The bleak weather mirrored the tone of his disclosure. He began his narrative, recounting events from 3 years prior when Victor Drazi attempted to encroach on his territory. An initial negotiation was violated when Victor murdered 4 of his associates as a demonstration of bad faith. Elena waited, sensing the narrative was incomplete. He then revealed that one of the victims was his younger brother. Her expression of sympathy was dismissed. Adrienne's tone was devoid of emotion as he stated his brother understood the risks. He framed Victor's action as a transgression that necessitated a calculated, patient search for a vulnerability. Elena correctly identified herself as that vulnerability. Adrienne clarified she represented an opportunity, a weakness in Victor's defenses. He then made eye contact, his gaze clinical. He admitted that upon seeing her engagement photos and recognizing her from the Meridian event, he understood she was the key, an unwitting witness who provided the leverage he required. The subject exhibited signs of disappointment, a reaction suggesting she had hoped for a more altruistic motive. She verbalized this, stating he hadn't saved her, but merely acquired a useful asset. Adrienne conceded a dual motivation, admitting that without her strategic value, he likely would not have intervened. Subject Adrienne's disclosure eschews heroic pretense, a calculated move to differentiate himself from past abusers. He acknowledges an objective truth. Elena's freedom is a desirable outcome, independent of altruistic motives. This brutal honesty appears to resonate with the subject, who has been conditioned by manipulative falsehoods. Her inquiry regarding her future displays classic captive anxiety. Adrienne's response is a strategic maneuver, promising non-confinement to secure compliance, framing it not as ownership but as liberation from a prior state of captivity. When freedom is posited as the final transaction, the subject exhibits predictable distrust. Adrienne counters by defining his power as psychological, not proprietary, a clear distinction from the methodologies of her father and Victor. He presents a binary choice: assist in the aggressor's downfall to reclaim her autonomy. This is not freedom, but a controlled alternative. Elena's facial analysis fails to detect deception, only indicators of fatigue and residual animosity. Her conditional agreement marks a critical shift toward reclaiming agency, an attempt to set terms within a new power structure. She demands operational inclusion, a predictable overcorrection from a state of complete powerlessness. Adrienne's refusal, framed as a protective measure, is perceived by Elena as a familiar form of control. She equates the mansion's security with another cage, verbalizing a pattern of male-dominated decision-making by her father Victor, and now him. Her ultimatum to risk her life on her own terms is a declaration of psychological emancipation, a rejection of the passive victim role. She articulates a preference for active participation in her fate over passive submission. A flicker in Adriana's expression suggests a recognition of a shared survivalist pathology. He dismisses her request as naive. Elena counters with a logical argument, reframing her learned coping mechanism of being unobtrusive, a product of her profession, as a tactical asset. She articulates that her social invisibility allows for a proximity that armed operatives cannot achieve. This is a cognitive restructuring of her vulnerability into a functional strength. She asserts a symbiotic need, positioning her unique access as vital to his objectives beyond her testimony. Adrienne's prolonged stare indicates a clinical assessment of her proposition. His subsequent smile, though minimal, signals an intellectual approval of her strategic thinking. His diagnosis, very brave or completely insane, is met with her own self-assessment, a fusion of both states. He reasserts control by deferring the decision and imposing a non-negotiable directive of immediate confinement. For Elena, this small concession represents a significant tactical gain, an initial foothold within the command structure. Her acceptance of fine signals a pragmatic compromise. She stipulates that her supervision must not reinforce a fragile victim schema. Adrienne assigns Sophia, a subject he deems unlikely to engage in coddling behaviors. Before departing, Elena inquires about his deceased brother, Daniel. This is a sophisticated maneuver to reframe their alliance from a transactional one to a shared emotional mission. Upon entering, Elena encounters Sophia, whose posture suggests a predatory casualness. Sophia's immediate analysis of the negotiation follows, placing Elena on a spectrum of foolishness and courage. "You have engaged in a direct power negotiation with Adrian Vale," Sophia observed. "This indicates either a profound lack of judgment or a risk tolerance exceeding that of most male operatives here." Elena affirms the possibility of both. Sophia's laugh signals social acceptance. She then initiates a tour, framing it as a survival tutorial. The subject questions the imminence of an internal threat. Sophia's response becomes grave, confirming that in their environment, danger is omnipresent and originates from unpredictable sources, both internal and external. Trust, she clarifies, is a resource to be earned even within these walls. Every camera, sensor, and alert terminates in this location. They observe a technician, Tommy, monitoring multiple data streams. Sophia introduces Elena as the catalyst for the current state of high alert. Tommy confirms he is tracking elevated hostile activity along the perimeter, indicating Victor's operatives are escalating their approach. When Elena inquires about the degree of escalation, Tommy displays heat signature data, revealing 3 distinct reconnaissance probes during the preceding night. The objective is clearly to map their defensive grid and identify vulnerabilities. The subject's anxiety manifests in a query about defensive integrity. Sophia's reply is pragmatic. Structural weaknesses are a constant. The strategy is to remediate them faster than the opposition can exploit them. Elena's gaze on the monitors reflects a projection of her own vulnerability onto the security system. Her quiet question about their capacity to endure is met with a shared glance between Sophia and Tommy. Sophia asserts an unwavering confidence in their operational timeline, stating that failure is not a financial or strategic option for Adrienne. "We proceed to the armory," Sophia states. When the subject questions the necessity, Sophia explains that in the event of a containment breach, self-defense protocols are mandatory. The implicit statement is that Victor's tutelage did not include firearms training. The thought of handling a weapon induces a palpable fear response in Elena, yet she cognitively accepts the logic. The armory is a subterranean, high-security facility. Inside, a comprehensive arsenal is displayed. Sophia directs her to select a handgun, an instruction the subject initially resists with a verbal expression of incapacity. This is a Glock 19 9mm, Sophia states, detailing its attributes. She physically corrects Elena's grip, her movements efficient and certain. She then delivers the foundational safety protocols. A psychosomatic response is observed in Elena. Her hands tremble, and she perceives the weapon's weight as disproportionate to its mass. Her whispered, "I can't do this," is met with a firm directive from Sophia, who frames the alternative as a reversion to the victim state, rendering all prior efforts meaningless. Elena's submission to the training protocol marks a significant psychological shift. They spend the next hour on the basement range. Initial performance is poor, characterized by wide shots and a pronounced flinch response. However, through conditioned repetition, motor skills and accuracy improve. Upon cessation, the subject reports auditory ringing and somatic aching, distinct from simple physical fatigue. Sophia's assessment of "not bad" serves as positive reinforcement. A daily training regimen is established. "By the week's end, you will achieve proficiency," Sophia noted. "Within a month, your survivability in a live fire scenario will increase." The subject expresses a hope to avoid such a scenario. The guiding principle here is to hope for the best while training fear the worst. Following the session, Elena's meal consumption is rote, her focus internalized on the sensory memory of the firearm. She is undergoing a period of identity fragmentation, perceiving her former self as a separate, now deceased entity, with the aborted wedding as the point of termination. This emergent persona, forged through combat training and negotiation, is in a nascent and volatile stage. 4 days elapse, establishing a routine of physical conditioning with Sophia and cognitive work with an analyst named James. They review event photography, attempting to reconstruct intelligence from peripheral details. The subject's memory exhibits fragmentation, a common symptom of trauma. She had been focused on professional execution, not latent criminal activity. On the 4th day, James isolates a photographic detail, an unidentified male subject in a gray suit, positioned in a corner of the frame. Subject Elena's recall was tested regarding the provided image. Her inability to identify the male subject, partially obscured, is consistent with sensory overload from the high-stimulus environment. The operative, James, identified him as Thomas Garrett, an individual with a documented history of customs violations. Elena's objection regarding the volume of data is a typical response to cognitive saturation. James correctly noted that in network analysis, proximity is often sufficient. He then redirected her focus to a tablet, seeking more reliable, objective evidence. The photographic evidence showed a tablet with an obscured screen, displaying what appeared to be a data spreadsheet. Elena reported a dissociative, automated state during the event, a common coping mechanism limiting memory encoding. James proposed attempting to trigger latent memory recall, though Elena's nonverbal cues suggested low confidence in this method. The process was interrupted by the arrival of an operative named Marcus, whose grim demeanor signaled an imminent crisis and a new external stressor. The directive from the group's leader, Adrian, induced a pronounced somatic stress response in subject Elena. The assembled group exhibited signs of shared high anxiety. The leader's posture indicated detached authority as he announced that the antagonist, Vittorio, was initiating a strategic maneuver. He presented surveillance footage as evidence. This visual data depicted a forced, violent entry into a private residence, a clear act of dominance and intimidation by Vittorio's operatives. The recording culminated with the forcible removal of a female victim, the visual identification of this individual as Sarah, an associate, triggered an acute shock response in subject Elena. Adrian then verbalized the antagonist's intent, leveraging a personal attachment as a tool for psychological warfare. This was immediately followed by a direct communication from Vittorio, which included a photographic threat and a coercive exchange offer. The act was clinically designed to exploit Elena's emotional bonds. The subject presented with symptoms of an acute stress reaction, including cognitive impairment and fixation on the victim's past loyalty. Other operatives correctly analyzed the situation as a psychological trap, noting the antagonist's motive was punitive, not transactional. Elena sought a dissonant, positive assessment from Adrian, but was met with a confirmation of the grim prognosis. The leader clinically defined the entire scenario as a performance, or theater, designed by a megalomaniac narcissist. Adrian articulated the antagonist's psychopathology to engineer a scenario where Elena would witness the hostage's death before her own, maximizing psychological torment. Adrian proposed a strategy of tactical non-engagement. Elena rejected this logic, unable to dehumanize the hostage. Adrian's rebuttal was starkly utilitarian, explaining that compliance would result in 2 casualties instead of 1. This logical calculus precipitated a state of profound moral injury within the subject. Subject Elena asserted her own agency, a decision driven by an exaggerated sense of responsibility and guilt. She verbalized her intent to act unilaterally, prompting a direct command from the leader, which she refused. This confrontation of wills created a palpable tension within the unit. Adrian then employed a tone of menacing finality, presenting her with an unalterable assessment. Unilateral action would result in her death and would not alter the hostage's fate. The subject vocalized a cognitive distortion, assuming full culpability for the antagonist's actions. Adrian attempted a cognitive restructuring by correctly reassigning blame to the perpetrator, Vittorio. He physically intervened to de-escalate her emotional state and challenged her self-destructive ideation by asking her to consider the hostage's perspective. The subject's response, however, indicated she equated self-sacrifice with loyalty, a common but dangerous emotional fallacy. Adrian pivoted to a strategy of channeling her impulses, proposing a 48-hour delay for intelligence analysis. An associate reinforced this by deconstructing the antagonist's use of an artificial deadline to provoke reckless behavior. The subject's internal state was one of extreme agitation and helplessness. Her subsequent query about the hostage's fate within the 48-hour window revealed her overriding and persistent anxiety. The operative Sophia posited a paradigm shift from rescue to retribution, a logic that finally seemed to penetrate the subject's emotional defenses. Elena's self-soothing gestures indicated a reluctant capitulation. The leader immediately operationalized this compliance, delegating intelligence tasks to the group. This served to redirect collective anxiety into productive action. James was tasked with vetting contacts to locate Vittorio's operational bases. Marcus was to probe departmental sources. While the team mobilized, Elena remained in a catatonic state, fixated on the traumatic visual stimuli. Adrian's attempt to offer empathy was met with hostile rejection as the subject reverted to her self-blame pathology. She engaged in counterfactual thinking, suggesting that compliance with Vittorio's initial demands would have averted the crisis. This is a classic bargaining response to extreme guilt. Adrian dismantled the subject's delusion by presenting the probable outcome of her capitulation: psychological or physical death. He reiterated that guilt was a non-functional emotion and prescribed a task-oriented intervention to mitigate her distress. The subject complied numbly, and the engagement in a structured intelligence-gathering activity for the following 6 hours provided a marginal palliative effect on her acute symptoms. The structured work provided a minimal distraction. At precisely midnight, Vittorio re-engaged, escalating his psychological assault with guilt-inducing language and new photographic evidence of physical harm. He then detailed a schedule of progressive mutilation, a classic method for amplifying psychological pressure. The subject displayed a severe somatic response. James's assertion that the threat was a bluff was a transparent, if ineffective, attempt at emotional regulation. James accurately diagnosed Vittorio's objective: to induce emotional dysregulation and impair judgment. The subject's query confirmed that both operatives understood the threat was credible. Elena then retreated for a necessary, contained emotional catharsis. Afterward, she exhibited a notable psychological shift toward cold resolve. This trauma-induced resilience appeared to accelerate the unit's progress, leading them to a probable location by mid-morning. A derelict warehouse in the industrial sector, recently acquired by a proxy firm linked to Victor's network, was the focal point. "The subject is located here," Adrian stated, analyzing satellite data provided by Tommy. "The area is secluded, defensible, and near enough to the city for rapid relocation." "What is the entry protocol?" Elena inquired, her system sustained for over 24 hours by caffeine and anxiety. "Negative," Adrian countered. "Not yet. We must first establish surveillance, confirm her presence. We will quantify guards and chart ingress and egress routes. This requires a 12-hour window, possibly less." Adrian observed her. "I recognize the impulse for immediate action, but a premature entry results in fatalities." "She is already experiencing trauma, which will be compounded by our failure," Adrian stated clinically. "Trust my assessment. I have extensive field experience. Patience is a survival metric." Elena's instinct was to object, but she lacked the operational background Adrian possessed. She acquiesced. It was the longest 12 hours of her life. Sophia escorted her to the firing range, likely diagnosing Elena's need for a physical outlet. Elena expended 200 rounds, her shot grouping tightening as motor skills superseded conscious thought. "You're developing a proficiency for this," Sophia remarked. "I despise it," Elena responded, reloading. "With every trigger pull, I simulate aiming at a human subject. Do not engage that simulation," Sophia instructed. "Should that scenario manifest, your body will react. Cognition is an impediment. Is that meant to be therapeutic? It's meant to be factual." Sophia inspected the weapon, then returned it. "You are not a killer, Elena, but a survivor. A critical distinction exists. And if survival necessitates killing, then you perform the necessary action and process it later." Sophia's demeanor was rigid. Guilt is a psychological luxury afforded only to the living. This philosophy was so antithetical to Elena's established moral framework that she could not integrate it, but she filed it away for potential future application. By evening, Marcus and Nikolai concluded their reconnaissance. "Subject confirmed," Marcus reported. "Second level, northwest quadrant. 3 visible hostels with a high probability of more inside. Victor is not on site. He is too meticulous for that. His second, an individual named Ramos, is managing the operation." "Ramos?" Adrian reiterated, his expression hardening. "He is in some respects more pathological than Victor. He derives gratification from the work. A wave of nausea afflicted Elena. So, what is the operational plan? We proceed tonight. 2 units, Marcus, Nikolai, and I, will breach the main floor to create a diversion. Reese and Sophia, you will infiltrate via roof access, secure Sarah, and exfiltrate. And my role? Elena pressed. You remain here. That is categorically unacceptable. Adrian's jaw muscles tensed. This is not subject to debate. All terms are subject to debate. You imparted that lesson. Elena held her position. Sarah has no rapport with you. If she is traumatized, she will not comply with strangers, but she will comply with me. That is precisely why you are a liability, Reese interjected. Your emotional state will be a tactical compromise. That gets operatives killed, or it ensures Sarah's survival, because I am the sole individual who can establish a therapeutic alliance with her. Elena faced Adrian. You stated you wanted me to exercise agency. I am choosing this. Adrian studied her for a protracted moment. Then, unexpectedly, he consented. Fine, but you will adhere to protocol precisely. No unscripted actions, no improvisation. You will execute Sophia's commands when she gives them. Understood. Agreed, Elena affirmed, a paradoxical surge of relief and terror coursing through her. Then prepare yourself, Sophia said, assessing Elena. We depart in 2 hours. Those 2 hours elapsed in a fugue state of preparation. Sophia equipped Elena in dark tactical gear, instructed her on the use of a communications unit, and made her rehearse the plan until it was ingrained. Elena was issued a Glock, the same model from her training, and spare magazines that felt like lead weights in her pockets. The probability of its use is low, Sophia noted, but low probability is not zero probability. The transit to the warehouse was conducted in silence. Elena was positioned between Sophia and Reese in an unmarked van, her heart rate so elevated she felt it might fracture her ribs. In the front, Marcus drove as Adrian conducted a final review of the plan. They stopped 3 blocks out. The industrial zone was devoid of life at this hour, a landscape of hollow structures and failed streetlights, ideal for clandestine activities. Comms check, Adrian said softly. Each operative confirmed their link. Elena's voice quavered on her turn, but the unit functioned. The teams separated. Marcus, Nikolai, and Adrian advanced toward the main entrance. Reese, Sophia, and Elena moved to the rear toward a corroded fire escape leading to the roof. Ascend, Sophia whispered with a gesture. The climb was a study in terror. The structure groaned and shifted, and Elena's hands perspired despite the cold, yet she reached the roof without incident or significant noise. The warehouse roof was a flat expanse of gravel and refuse. A single access hatch led into the structure. Reanalyzed the lock, produced a small tool set, and defeated it in under 30 seconds. They dropped into blackness. The warehouse interior was a confusing network of corridors and empty chambers, illuminated by sparse, bare bulbs. Elena registered voices from below, guards perhaps, worse, her hand constricted around the Glock. Sophia navigated from memory and a blueprint, guiding them across the 2nd floor to the northwest corner. They moved past rooms of derelict machinery, offices stripped of assets, and restrooms resembling cinematic horror sets. Then Sophia raised a closed fist, the signal to halt. Light bled from under a nearby door, accompanied by 2 male voices in low conversation. Target location identified, Reese murmured into his comms. 2 hostiles outside, awaiting your signal. Acknowledged, Adrian's voice returned. 30 seconds. The 30-second interval felt like an eternity. Then, from a distance, Elena heard the percussive sound of the main entry breach. Shouts, then gunfire. The two guards outside Sarah's room reacted instantly, moving toward the sound. Hands on their weapons. Reese and Sophia moved with predatory efficiency. Silent, rapid, and brutal. The guards were neutralized before they could raise an alarm. One was struck with the stock of Reese's rifle, the other incapacitated by Sophia with a movement too fast for Elena to process. "Clear," Sophia stated. She checked the door. Locked. Reese discharged his weapon into the lock. The report was deafening in the confined space. They stormed the room, a small chamber filled with the smell of blood and fear. There was Sarah, restrained to a chair, as depicted in the photograph, her face contused and bloodied, her expression a mixture of shock, hope, and terror. "Elena," she rasped. "I'm here," Elena said, moving to her. "I'm here. I have you." Her hands trembled as she worked on the restraints on Sarah's wrists. They were cinched tight, abrading the skin, and Elena's fingers struggled with the knots. "Faster," Sophia commanded, maintaining observation at the door. "We have a window of approximately 2 minutes before reinforcements arrive." "I am trying." Elena freed one hand, then the second. Sarah collapsed forward and Elena supported her. Her body mass was less than expected. She was trembling uncontrollably. "Can you ambulate?" Reese inquired. I believe so." More gunfire erupted below, closer this time, along with angry, organized shouting. "We must move," Sophia said. "Now." They half-supported Sarah between them, moving back through the labyrinthine hallways. Elena's entire sensory world compressed to the sound of Sarah's labored breathing, the weight of her friend, and her own heart's frantic rhythm. Behind them, running footsteps. "Contact rear," Reese shouted, pivoting and firing. The pursuing hostile fell, but more were advancing. Elena could hear them, a wave of organized violence ascending the stairs. "Go, go, go!" Sophia urged them on, laying down suppression fire. They reached the roof access and began to climb. Sarah faltered, nearly falling, but Elena caught and pulled her up with a surge of desperate strength. Then they were on the roof. Exposed to the cold wind, the fire escaped their sole path down. "Move," reordered. They made a controlled, chaotic descent. Sarah vocalizing pain with each movement, Elena's grip slipping on the cold metal. Behind them, guards emerged onto the roof, weapons raised. Bullets impacted the metal around them. Elena felt a projectile pass so close to her head. She perceived the air it displaced, but they made it to the ground. Marcus was waiting with the van, its door open and engine running. "In," he commanded. They threw themselves aboard. Marcus accelerated before the door was shut, the tires protesting as they fled the warehouse. Elena held Sarah while the van sped through the streets, her friend sobbing against her, alive, traumatized, but secure. "We did it," Elena whispered, as much for her own reassurance as Sarah's. "You are safe now. I have you." In the distance, the warehouse disappeared, but the threat was not yet neutralized. "We are not returning to the mansion." "Too predictable," Adrian stated from the front, his voice taut with managed adrenaline. "Victor knows we have her. He will anticipate a return to our primary base. We are proceeding to the safe house." Elena barely registered his words. Her attention was fixed on Sarah, who had become silent and catatonic in her arms. Shock, likely, or something worse. "She requires medical attention," Elena stated. "We have a physician at the safe house," re-answered, already using her phone. "Dr. Chen, he is reliable. I am contacting him now." The safe house was an anonymous apartment building in a nondescript urban area, a location designed to be overlooked. Marcus entered an underground garage and they moved Sarah up via a service elevator, bypassing all surveillance and potential observers. The safe house presented as a sterile, non-entity space designed for transient use. Elena positioned the subject, Sarah, on a sofa, applying physical contact as a grounding measure. Sarah showed classic symptoms of acute stress, dissociated gaze, and tachypnea. Elena attempted verbal reassurance. Sarah, look at me. You're safe. A brief moment of cognitive connection was followed by a cathartic release. The subject then verbalized the core psychological manipulation she endured, a false narrative of Elena's death for which she was made culpable. They said you were dead, Sarah stated, that Victor had killed you. This was all my fault. Elena countered the assertion directly. And none of this is your fault. Do you hear me? Before a response could be given, a medic, an Asian male in his 60s later identified as Dr. Chen, arrived. He approached Sarah with practiced objectivity, his assessment of her injuries immediate and visual. Let me examine her, he requested. Elena withdrew, observing his methodical work. The subject displayed a hyper-vigilant flinch to his touch but remained compliant. The physician's diagnosis was delivered concisely. 2 cracked ribs, possible concussion, multiple contusions and lacerations, none requiring stitches. He added notes on her dehydration and malnourishment, but deemed her condition not life-threatening. When asked about prognosis, he differentiated between outcomes. Physically, recovery was likely. The emotional prognosis was uncertain, given Sarah's vacant effect. He administered analgesics and dressed her wounds. The subject remained largely nonverbal throughout. Elena's constant proximity appeared to be a stabilizing influence. The medic's final instructions were standard protocol: for a potential concussion, rest for 48 hours and observation for worsening symptoms. Call me if anything changes, he stated, departing as unobtrusively as he arrived. Elsewhere, Adrian, Marcus, and Nikolai were engaged in a low, urgent tactical discussion regarding retaliation and endgame scenarios. Elena deferred her involvement to focus on the subject's immediate needs, guiding her to wash. Inside the shower, Sarah exhibited a catatonic stillness, passively allowing the water to remove the physical evidence of her trauma, while the profound psychological damage persisted. After being dressed in oversized clothes, Sarah was led to a bed. Elena's instruction to sleep triggered an acute separation anxiety. Sarah seized her wrist with surprising force, pleading, "Don't leave." Providing assurance, Elena stayed. The subject's grip soon relaxed as physiological exhaustion overwhelmed her. In sleep, Sarah exhibited PTSD symptoms, including flinching at non-existent stimuli and subconscious lacrimation. Elena began to process her own role in the events, a nuanced guilt separate from the narrative forced upon Sarah. She did not accept responsibility for Victor's sadism, but her actions had undeniably placed Sarah in his path. This rumination was interrupted by Adrian's quiet arrival. His inquiry about Sarah's condition was met with Elena's emotionally blunted response: asleep, broken, alive. Adrienne's attempt at positive reinforcement was rejected by Elena's self-recrimination. He reframed it as a collective success, but Elena pivoted to threat analysis, noting that Victor's narcissistic personality would demand severe retaliation for these humiliations. He's going to come at us with everything, she assessed. Adrienne concurred, outlining an accelerated plan to neutralize the threat before Victor could regroup. The strategy involved leveraging damning photographic evidence linking Victor to 3 federal crimes, including arms trafficking and conspiracy to commit murder. With witness corroboration, the objective was life imprisonment. This tactical victory, however, left Elena feeling emotionally hollow. The plan was set to execute the following morning with simultaneous federal raids. By noon, Victor Drazi will be in federal custody, Adrian asserted with confidence. The case is solid. Elena's past experiences, however, fostered skepticism. She shifted focus back to the immediate threat. What about Sarah? The subject's status was now a material witness, making her a primary target. Adrian detailed the standard protocols: a new identity, relocation, and federal protection. As an alternative, he offered his personal security, a proposition Elena equated to another form of confinement. Safety isn't a cage, Adrian retorted, his tone edged. I'm offering her a chance to survive this. Elena deconstructed his premise of choice, recasting her own involvement as a functional transaction. You needed a witness, so you grabbed me. You needed leverage, so you used me. She dismissed all protective measures as cosmetic features of this core transaction. Adrian's jaw tightened at the accusation. You think that's all this is to me? Elena noted his motives remained opaque. The unresolved conflict hung between them. Adrian disengaged and left with a terse directive to rest. Elena remained, her own sleep prevented by intrusive, trauma-related cognitions. She analyzed Victor's methods, identifying the psychological torture, inducing guilt over a fabricated death as a more insidious tool than his physical violence. As anticipated by her analysis, Sarah awoke, screaming from a night terror. Elena immediately administered grounding techniques, speaking in a low, soothing tone. You're safe. After several minutes of de-escalation, Sarah's panic subsided. She began to vocalize extreme guilt, a typical symptom. I'm sorry, she repeated. Elena's refutation was met with a hysterical laugh and a confession. She had disclosed intel under interrogation. The information was seemingly trivial, personal habits and routines of Elena's, yet Sarah correctly assessed its strategic value to a manipulator like Victor. They mattered to him. Elena prioritized the fact of her survival over the intelligence breach. Though she offered reassurance, Elena's internal threat assessment was active. Sarah's disclosure meant Victor could now weaponize Elena's own patterns and safe spaces, creating pervasive insecurity. Leaving Sarah with another operative, Sophia, she joined Adrian, Marcus, and James, who were monitoring a laptop. The raids start in 20 minutes, James reported. Federal agents are in position at all 6 target locations. An intelligence contact was feeding them a live stream. The screen showed agents in tactical gear, mobilizing within a government building. The primary target was Victor's residence, the first to be breached. Elena experienced a visceral stress response. She recognized the estate from photographs as the very place her confinement was to have begun after the wedding. A location of immense psychological threat had Adrian not intervened. Agents executed a forced entry, sweeping the residence with weapons drawn, but the structure was empty. He's not there, James said, his voice tight with tension. Marcus immediately contacted his source, his expression darkening as he listened. None of the locations have him, Marcus announced, confirming a total operational failure. His house, his office, all empty. Victor and his entire inner circle had disappeared. He was tipped off, Adrian concluded with deadly calm. Someone told him we were coming. Knowledge of the operation was limited to our unit and the federal contingent, implying a security breach, Adrienne stated, her gaze clinical. The possibility existed in either organization. This toxic inference permeated the room. An informant on Adrian's team reporting to Vittorio meant all sanctuary was illusory. Every strategy could be undermined, each action foreseen. The source must be identified, reasserted from the entrance, her arrival unnoticed. Before casualties escalate. Concurred. James, initiate a total communications review, all transmissions over the past 48 hours. Flag any anomalies, Adrian instructed, then faced Marcus. Assemble the unit. Confirm all personnel. Place everyone under observation until we can ascertain who is reliable. You suspect an insider? Nikolai's voice was sharp with agitated disbelief. One of your own? I believe Vittorio is adept at purchasing allegiance when he cannot coerce it, and $200,000 is a powerful motivator. The assertion created a palpable tension. Elena exhibited a visceral stress response. Her faith in this protective unit, vital for her and Sarah's survival, had been compromised. The evidence, she inquired, is it not enough for an arrest? They must locate him first, James stated grimly. And Vittorio is highly skilled at evasion. Elena's mobile device vibrated. She retrieved it, anticipating another coercive text from Vittorio. The message was from her father. Elena, Vittorio has offered to resolve this if you return. He proposes a full pardon. This can conclude without further conflict. Contact me. She processed the text, her effect shifting to intense anger. Her father was again attempting to commodify her, to bargain with her autonomy. Presenting the message to Adrian, he analyzed the tactic. He is manipulating your father. It's a pose of magnanimity. The gambit is transparent, but it is diagnostically useful. Vittorio's control is eroding. Your escape was a narcissistic injury, deepened by Sarah's extraction. He is now a fugitive, seeking to reclaim dominance. Through a pretense of mercy? Elena's laugh was caustic. That's not credible. To his loyalists it is. If he casts himself as the benevolent party offering peace against our aggression, he assumes the victim role for cover. Elena erased the message without reply. A climate of intense social paranoia defined the subsequent hours. Tommy executed security audits while James analyzed data streams. Adrienne conducted individual interrogations, searching for behavioral tells or deception. Elena remained with Sarah, who presented as withdrawn and anhedonic. I need to return home, Sarah finally articulated. It is not yet possible. The environment is hostile. This entire context is hostile, Sarah countered. Your existence, this shadow world. Her gesture encompassed their confinement. This state of constant threat is unsustainable for me. I know. Forgive me. Cease your apologies. Sarah's tone was uncharacteristically sharp. My anger is not directed at you. It is directed at the circumstances, at Vittorio's pathology, your father's lack of moral courage, and my own perceived inadequacies. Her vocalization fractured. Elena initiated physical contact. You possess immense resilience. Survival is the ultimate measure of strength. I don't perceive strength. I perceive fragmentation. Can fragmentation be repaired? Sarah asked, seeking reassurance. I doubt I will ever experience a sense of security again. Every auditory stimulus triggers a traumatic flashback to my captivity. Her narrative ceased with a tremor. Elena offered no verbal comfort, recognizing its futility. She provided support as Sarah entered a state of catharsis. Later, with Sarah sedated by exhaustion, Elena located Adrian on the balcony overlooking the urban landscape. The low afternoon sun provided little warmth, mirroring the ambient emotional temperature. "Have you uncovered anything?" Elena inquired. "Negative. This implies either a highly competent operative or a flawed hypothesis." Adrian's gaze remained distant. "Neither conclusion is optimal." "What is the next protocol?" "Observation. We wait. Vittorio's megalomania will compel him to reemerge. We will be prepared for his manifestation." "So we remain static?" "We remain viable," Adrian corrected, finally meeting her eyes. "Survival is 90% patience and 10% execution. This may lack the dramatic resolution you anticipate." "I anticipate no drama," Elena replied. "I was hoping for a conclusion." "It is imminent." "You repeat that, yet he consistently evades capture. We are perpetually outmaneuvered." Elena's posture became self-protective. What if his strategic advantage is permanent? What if he's uncontainable? Then we alter the strategic paradigm. We cease pursuit and compel him to approach. By leveraging me as a lure? By presenting an illusion of his desired outcome that benefits our objective. Elena scanned his features, attempting to decipher his tactical process. "You have a strategy." "A nascent one," Adrian confirmed. "Vittorio desires you as an object lesson to repair his public image. Consider allowing him the illusion of reacquiring you." "You are proposing I deliver myself to him?" "I propose he believes you are doing so." The meeting would be in a controlled, public setting. His objective appears met, but he is exposed for federal apprehension. The risk was extreme, yet Elena perceived no alternative. "What is the contingency for failure?" she asked. "My intervention will be the same as the last." "That may not be feasible." "It will be," Adrian stated. His absolute conviction was disquieting rather than reassuring, suggesting a willingness to accept any cost to fulfill his promise. A concerning development for Elena. Elena recognized a shift in her own psychology. She had developed a protective concern for him. This attachment, a possible symptom of Stockholm Syndrome, marked a significant change in their dynamic. "I require time for consideration," she stated. "Understood. We have until—" His phone's alert interrupted him. He took the call, his demeanor hardening. "Time of incident? Location? Number of fatalities?" Elena felt a physiological fear response. A critical event had occurred. Adrian had terminated the call. "Vittorio attacked my South Side facility. Total incendiary loss. 3 personnel were inside. There were no survivors." "I see. This is an escalation, a stimulus designed to provoke an emotional, error-prone response from me." Adrian's vocal tone was devoid of affect. "The stimulus is effective." "What is your intended action?" "The action I should have initiated originally. Conclude the conflict." He moved toward the exit. "Remain with Sarah. Do not vacate the premises. Marcus and Ree are your protection detail. I will return upon completion." "Adrian." But he had departed with Nikolai and James. Elena remained on the balcony, processing the psychological weight of 3 additional fatalities attributed to the conflict. Returning inside, she found Marcus and Ree in somber discussion. "What is his objective?" Elena inquired. "Termination," Ree stated succinctly. "By any means." "What does that entail?" "Any necessary action." The ambiguity of the response was more alarming to Elena than a direct statement as she began to grasp the boundlessness of Adriana's operational parameters. Darkness descended. Elena and Sarah remained in a state of hypervigilance, unable to rest. The spatial perception of the apartment constricted. Near midnight, her phone signaled a call from a blocked number. She answered impulsively. "Hello, Elena?" Vittoria's voice was placid, cultured, and without emotional inflection. "It is time for a direct dialogue between us. No third parties, no aggression. A simple discussion regarding the resolution." Elena's grip on the device intensified. "How did you acquire this number?" "I inevitably acquire all I desire. You should understand this principle." A brief silence. "I am transmitting an address. Arrive unaccompanied. The presence of Adrian or his associates will result in Sarah's death. Your failure to appear within the hour will result in the extermination of her family. Sarah is no longer with you." "Correct, but her mother is not, and her sibling is a sophomore at Northern Illinois. Their harm would be regrettable." Elena experienced an acute physiological stress reaction. "This is a bluff. Are you certain enough to test that hypothesis?" Vittorio's tone became menacing. "1 hour, Elena. The coordinates are incoming. Do not fail me." The call ended. A text with an address in a financial district skyscraper arrived immediately. Elena analyzed the message, her cognitive functions accelerating. This was the exact ensnarement Adrian had predicted. Vittorio's intent was lethal. Yet non-compliance would trigger violence against Sarah's family, a burden of guilt Elena could not bear. She glanced toward Sarah's room, where the other subject slept, sedated. The subject observed her security detail, Marcus and Ree, who were monitoring surveillance, ignorant of the coercive ultimatum Elena had been issued. She weighed disclosure against the certainty they would intervene, precipitating the threatened outcome for Sarah's family. To circumvent this, she elected to comply with Victor's directive. The subject made her decision, securing her coat and the Glock firearm she concealed in her waistband, a measure Sophia had insisted upon, and proceeded to the exit. "Where are you headed?" Reese's query was sharp. "Restroom," Elena vocalized the deception. "Insomnia." Diverting from the stated destination, she exited the building into the Chicago night, moving toward the high-rise and the arranged confrontation. The subject exhibited a cognitive shift, rejecting her role as a passive entity and ceasing to allow her choices to be dictated by others. She resolved that this conflict would conclude based on her own agency, accepting that this could lead to a fatal outcome. The high-rise presented as a monolith of glass and steel, a symbol of power. Elena maintained observation from across the street, the Glock a cold, dense pressure against her back. She had utilized a rideshare service. The driver's reaction to the financial district address at that hour suggested cognitive dissonance. She experienced a similar internal query. Her mobile device vibrated with incoming communications since her departure, presumably from Adrian, Marcus, and Reese, all having noted her absence. Each contact represented an attempt to prevent her from executing her chosen course of action. Elena deactivated the device and disposed of it in a refuse container, eliminating further external influence. The building's lobby was occupied by a lone security officer who acknowledged her entrance. The guard, a young and anxious male, accepted the floor number Victor had transmitted without question, gesturing toward the elevators. "The penthouse is on 42, he stated. "Access has been authorized." This was expected. Victor's control remained absolute, even from concealment. The elevator's ascent felt like a psychological descent into an abyss. Her reflection in the mirrored walls appeared pallid, with hollowed eyes, a figure under duress, yet resolute. The reflection was not the same individual who had stood at a wedding altar 2 weeks prior. That iteration of the subject was defined by the choices of others. This version was entering a high-threat situation by her own volition. There was a sense of empowerment in this, despite the high probability of a lethal outcome. The elevator doors opened into a reception area of dark wood and low-level illumination. At its center stood Victor Drazi, hands in the pockets of a tailored suit. His appearance was consistent with his presentation at the church, precise, controlled, and dangerous. However, a colder affect was now observable in his eyes. "Elena," he initiated, as if it were a casual social meeting. "I'm pleased you arrived. I was uncertain you would. You threatened Sarah's family. What other course was there?" "There is always an alternative." Victor indicated 2 chairs positioned near the windows. "Sit. Let's maintain civility. I prefer to stand." "As you wish." Victor moved toward the windows, observing the cityscape below. "It's beautiful, is it not? All those lights, all those individuals living their insignificant lives, oblivious to the true mechanics of the world. Who really controls events?" "Is that your self-perception?" Elena queried. "That you are somehow superior, that your wealth and violence grant you significance?" Victor's smile was minimal. "My wealth and violence grant me autonomy, a concept you've never grasped. Your life has been dictated by your father, by events, by your own perceived weaknesses. Then Adrian Vale disrupted my wedding, and you believed he was your rescuer. But he was not, was he? He simply exchanged one form of confinement for another. Adrian is not you. No, he is worse in some respects. I am at least transparent about my nature. Adrian projects a clean conscience, citing principles and a code. Ultimately, however, we are the same type of man, taking what we desire and eliminating any obstacle." Victor turned to face her. "The distinction is, I would have provided you with everything. Security, luxury, protection. What has Adrian provided? Fear, flight, a clandestine existence?" "He provided me with a choice," Elena stated. "You never did." "Choice?" Victor uttered the word with palpable disdain. "Do you want to understand the consequence of choice? Sarah, subjected to torture because you chose to flee. 3 of Adrian's operatives incinerated because you chose to involve yourself in a conflict that was not yours. And now you are here, having chosen to enter this building alone, likely to be killed. How is choice functioning for you?" The verbal assault was more effective than Elena anticipated, as he was correct on one point. Her decisions had resulted in severe consequences. Lives had been lost. Yet this did not validate Victor's position. "You are the one who harmed Sarah," Elena stated quietly. "You are the one who murdered those people. My decisions did not cause that. You did. It is because you cannot tolerate a loss of control. Because someone defied you and your ego could not process it." Victor's expression became rigid. "Be careful, Elena. You are here at my discretion." "No, I am not. I am here due to your desperation." Elena experienced a moment of cognitive clarity she previously lacked. "The federal authorities are closing in. Your subordinates are deserting. Your entire operation is collapsing, and you believed that by reclaiming me, by demonstrating continued power over me, you could salvage something, but you cannot. It is concluded, Victor. You simply have not processed it yet." For a protracted moment, Victor regarded her. Then he laughed, a sound of genuine amusement. "You have developed some fortitude," he remarked. "I will concede that. The woman I intended to marry would never have addressed me in this manner." "The woman you intended to marry is no longer a viable persona. You destroyed her when you attempted to acquire her." then her loss will be mourned. Victor's hand moved to his jacket interior. Elena's hand went to the Glock at her back, but Victor only retrieved his phone. "Allow me to show you something." He displayed the screen to her, revealing a live video feed of Sarah's mother's residence. 2 armed men were positioned outside. "One call," Victor said conversationally, "and they will enter. Sarah's mother will be terminated. Her brother will be terminated. Perhaps I will have them incinerate the house. Stage it as an accident, a tragedy." Elena's finger contacted the Glock's grip. "You won't." "I won't! What prevents me?" "The fact that you require my compliance. If you kill them, I have no further incentive to cooperate, and an individual with nothing to lose becomes unpredictable." Victor processed this. "A valid point. So let us negotiate. You return to me, willingly and publicly. We will stage a reconciliation. You were confused, frightened. Adrian manipulated you. We marry as planned. You perform the role of the beautiful wife, and I allow Sarah and her family to live. I will even permit Adrian to live, provided he avoids my affairs. You expect me to believe you would uphold that arrangement? I expect you to recognize it is the most favorable offer you will receive." Victor pocketed his phone. "Because the alternative is that I begin eliminating everyone you care for, one by one, until you plead for me to take you back, and then I will kill them anyway, to demonstrate the consequence of embarrassing me." Elena's grip tightened on the Glock. She could draw and fire. It was possible she could neutralize him before his security personnel, wherever they were, intervened. But that action would not protect Sarah's family. It would not stop the men at that house. "I require verification of their safety first," Elena stated. "Withdraw your men." "Let me confirm Sarah's family is secure, then we can discuss." Victor smiled. "Clever, distrustful. I prefer this version of you to the frightened girl at the altar." He retrieved his phone again. "But no, you do not dictate terms. You choose. Accept my offer now, or I make that call and you will bear the consequences." The elevator behind Elena chimed. She pivoted, her heart rate accelerating, anticipating Victor's guards. Instead, Adrian emerged, followed by Marcus and Nikolai. All 3 were armed. "Step away from her, Victor," Adrian said, his voice lethally calm. Victor's expression was unchanged. "I was anticipating your arrival." "Did you believe I would not detect her phone's deactivation? That I would not foresee you tracking her? Did you believe I would permit her to enter a trap unaccompanied?" "Oh, this is not a trap." Victor gestured to the room. "This is a conclusion, one way or another. Events end tonight." "Agreed," Adrian said. He addressed Elena. "Are you injured?" "No," she replied. "But he has operatives at Sarah's family's home." "Had operatives," Marcus interjected. "We extracted them 10 minutes ago. Sarah's mother and brother are in protective custody." A wave of relief washed over Elena, but Victor merely laughed. "Of course you did. Consistently thorough, Adrian. It is almost praiseworthy." Victor's hand moved to his jacket again, this time producing a firearm. "But thoroughness does not equate to invincibility." 3 more men materialized from the shadows of the room. Guards Elena had not perceived. They had weapons aimed at Adrian's team. "This is the protocol," Victor announced. "You will all lower your weapons very slowly, or we will determine who is faster." "There are federal agents in this building," Adrian stated. 3 floors below, awaiting my signal. You discharge that weapon, they will ascend, and your situation will be terminated." "A bluff," Victor countered. If federal agents were present, you would not have come up alone. You would have delegated to them. I'm not bluffing. Adrian's expression was impassive. This was always the strategy. Lure you out, contain you, and let the authorities manage you. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty registered on Victor's face. You are lying. Am I? Adrian retrieved his phone with his free hand. A single button press was the tactical solution. Its non-use implies Adrian intended to grant the subject, Elena, a form of therapeutic confrontation, agency over her tormentor. Victor's focus fixated on Elena, a classic objectification of his target. The subsequent threat triggered a conditioned, autonomic response in the subject. Motor skills from prior training were enacted without conscious input. The projectile struck Victor's shoulder, inducing a spin and disarming him, at which point opposing security details engaged. The atrium devolved into auditory and kinetic chaos. For the subject, the sensory assault prompted an acute stress reaction. She assumed a protective posture as enclosed acoustics magnified each report. Cognitive dissonance regarding her own violent act was present, but suppressed by survival imperatives. An associate, Marcus, moved her to cover. Visual data confirmed Victor was incapacitated and his detail neutralized, indicating a complete shift in the control dynamic of the situation. Adrian assumed a dominant stance over Victor, the individual who had attempted to exert total control over Elena. Victor's pained laughter displayed clear markers of a megalomaniac narcissist, believing his network made him immune to consequence. Adrian then activated a prearranged federal protocol. The sound of sirens induced a physiological stress response in Victor as his delusion of control collapsed. Adrian then enumerated the extensive federal charges, invalidating Victor's perceived legal impunity. The evidence file was comprehensive, with photographic records, associate testimony, and forensic accounting of transactions from the last 5 years. Victor resorted to a primitive ad hominem. As federal agents flooded the area, Adriana's team formalized the transfer of custody. Throughout the procedure, Victor maintained a fixed, hostile gaze on Elena. His final verbal threat lacked genuine conviction, a psychological indicator that he cognitively accepted his loss of power. A federal officer, Special Agent Chen, initiated contact to transition Elena from the scene. Adriana's immediate query about her legal status demonstrated a persistent protective impulse. Chen clarified Elena's role as a witness and victim, employing standard rapport-building techniques. The subject exhibited somatic tremors, a common post-adrenal state. Confirmation of a secondary party's safety prompted a profound cathartic relief in Elena, rendering her momentarily nonverbal. During his removal, Victor directed a final psychological barb at Elena, attempting to reframe her rescue as a transfer of ownership. This is a common tactic to undermine a victim's agency. Elena's quiet refutation, "I'm not anyone's," signaled a critical breakthrough in her self-perception. The following hours comprised a comprehensive debriefing where she recounted the chronology of her victimization. The process concluded at dawn, with Agent Chen ensuring her secure return to a safe house. Inside, Elena encountered Sarah, who displayed acute anxiety that was heightened by the sight of forensic evidence on Elena's clothing. Verbal confirmation of the perpetrator's capture triggered a profound emotional release in Sarah. Elena initiated physical comfort, resulting in a shared catharsis, a key component of co-regulated trauma processing. After stabilizing Sarah, Elena then sought out Adrian, indicating a need to process the event with him. Elena acknowledged her awareness of his surveillance, which he confirmed. She expressed gratitude, which he deflected by attributing the pivotal action to her. The subject verbally processed her violent act, noting a lack of expected emotional weight and framing it as a clinical necessity, a form of psychological distancing. Her current inability to articulate her feelings is consistent with a post-traumatic state. She then recalled the perpetrator's final, manipulative statement. She relayed Victor's assertion about trading one owner for another. Adrienne's extended silence preceded a direct query into her own perception. Elena analyzed his initial motive as retributive, but theorized a subsequent evolution. She astutely questioned the nature of their bond, identifying it as gratitude, a trauma response, or something authentic, a classic analysis of a potential Stockholm Syndrome dynamic. Her decision to leave is a conscious attempt to establish an independent identity. "I am choosing my own path," she stated, "a path I should have taken before external forces dictated my choices. I need to establish a core identity separate from the roles of fugitive or victim. Only then might we reevaluate this connection, free from the coercion or obligation that currently confounds it." Her gaze was direct. After a prolonged moment of complex internal assessment, Adrian slowly nodded his consent. Okay. The simple affirmation was contrary to Elena's expectation of conflict or negotiation. He verbally released her from any perceived obligation, his tone indicating emotional strain. "I don't own you," he reiterated. He then extended a conditional invitation for future contact, predicated on her self-actualization. "Let's see if our connection is real or just adrenaline and proximity." Elena accurately termed the ambiguous plan terrifying, but also freedom, accepting the anxiety inherent in true autonomy. "It is messy and nothing like the promise," she observed, "but it's mine." 3 weeks later, the subject had manifested her recovery in a tangible form, a photography exhibit in a new city. The work documented a therapeutic cross-country journey undertaken to reclaim her own perspective. She maintained daily communication with Sarah, who had also begun a formal therapeutic regimen showing a positive recovery trajectory for both individuals. Sarah's healing was progressive. Elena established firm boundaries by blocking her father's attempts at contact, a necessary step toward individuation. The commercial success of her art provided financial independence, a critical component of autonomy. Her current life was self-directed, yet accompanied by feelings of pride, disbelief, and a baseline anxiety, which is clinically consistent with this phase of post-traumatic growth. It was terrifying. The state was at times lonely, yet it was the most alive she had ever felt. A message arrived from Adrienne. It was supportive and non-coercive, respecting the boundaries she had established. The subsequent text exchange was light, showing a developing rapport outside the crisis dynamic. She typed, "I miss you." The subject's spontaneous admission, which appeared to surprise even her, suggests the emergence of a genuine emotional attachment distinct from the trauma bond she had feared. For 3 weeks, the subject engaged in determined cognitive suppression regarding Adrian and the potential of their bond. Yet with distance, the attachment resurfaced. His subsequent communication was a clinical reinforcement of his role as a stabilizing agent, promising patience and invoking their shared trauma of survival. Her memory then presented key bonding events as evidence: the church, the mansion, the warehouse incident, a final sunrise. The file notes he was the man who offered the illusion of choice when she was deprived of all agency. Her conflict remained. Could a relationship born from chaos exist in a state of calm? Yet she knew re-engagement was inevitable, a function of her emergent desire to dictate her own future. a future that might include the dangerous individual who had become her primary source of safety, a classic symptom. First, however, the process of individuation had to be completed. Elena turned from the phone to her photographs, artifacts of her own journey and choices. Outside the rain began a symbolic cleansing. In that gallery, Elena Cross finally occupied the center of her own existence, a life that was undeniably hers. The resolution was not perfect, but it was autonomous, and that was the diagnosis.
Guys, this story is not just mafia drama, it is a full-speed lesson about what happens when a person finally stops accepting a life written by cowards. Elena did not walk into that church like a bride, she walked in like collateral. Her father had already folded, Victor thought he had already won. The guests were seated, the deal was locked, and her future was basically wrapped up with a ribbon. Then boom, the church doors opened, Adrian showed up like a living plot twist, and suddenly the whole game changed. But here is the real lesson. Her life did not change because a dangerous man saved her. Her life changed because she chose. She took the hand, she accepted the chaos. She understood something most people avoid their whole lives. Staying in a comfortable prison is still dying, just slower. And that is the part people miss. Freedom is not always soft music and open skies. Sometimes freedom sounds like shattered glass, gunshots, and your entire fake life burning down in front of you. Elena learned that the scariest choice is often the only honest one. Victor wanted obedience. Her father wanted convenience. Even Adrian at first wanted leverage. Everybody wanted something from her. But the second she stopped being the girl they could trade, the whole system started shaking. That is the lesson. When a person stops agreeing to be owned, every manipulator around them suddenly panics, because control only works while the victim still believes they have no exit. Elena found the exit. It was messy, dangerous, and nearly fatal, but it was still an exit. And in real life, that is sometimes what courage looks like. Not confidence, not certainty, just one trembling decision that says, no more.